Alright, let's dive into something that's been buzzing in the news but rarely gets the nuanced discussion it deserves: the Canada-U.S. border and the so-called threats that supposedly flow across it. Here's the thing, when you hear politicians like Donald Trump claim Canada is flooding the U.S. with drugs and traffickers, it's easy to take those statements at face value. But if you take a step back and think about it, the reality on the ground is far more complex. And personally, I think that's where the real story lies. First off, let's talk about the Detroit River, which separates Detroit from Windsor, Ontario. Geographically, it's fascinating. Windsor is actually south of Detroit, connected by bridges and a tunnel, with millions of people crossing annually. This isn't just a border, it's a lifeline for trade, culture, and daily life. But here's where it gets interesting: the narrative of Canada as a source of drugs, particularly fentanyl, just doesn't hold up when you look at the data. In 2025, U.S. border officials in the Detroit sector seized over 4,200 kilograms of illegal drugs, including 15 kilograms of fentanyl. Sounds like a lot, right? But what many people don't realize is that the direction of flow matters. A lot of those drugs were actually leaving the U.S., not entering it. What this really suggests is that the U.S. might be more of a supplier than a victim in this narrative. Now, let's talk about guns. In 2024, 87% of guns recovered in crimes in Ontario were traced back to the U.S. In Toronto, that number jumps to 88%. This raises a deeper question: why is the conversation so focused on drugs coming from Canada when the evidence points to a significant flow of firearms going the other way? From my perspective, it feels like a classic case of misdirection. By focusing on fentanyl, the U.S. shifts attention away from its own role in fueling violence in Canada. One thing that immediately stands out is how this narrative serves political agendas more than it reflects reality. What makes this really interesting is the historical context. During Prohibition, the Windsor-Detroit corridor was a hotspot for smuggling alcohol into the U.S. Today, the challenge isn't bootleg liquor, it's recreational boaters. There are so many boats on the river that law enforcement can't possibly stop every one. Chris Grogan, from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, put it perfectly: every boat could be a smuggler unless we stop every single boat. But here's the catch: they rely on intelligence and partnerships, not just brute force. This highlights a broader trend in border security. It's not just about walls or patrols, it's about cooperation and data. Now, let's address the elephant in the room: Trump's tariffs. In 2025, he declared a national emergency, citing fentanyl from Canada, and slapped 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. The U.S. Supreme Court struck those down, but the damage was done. What many people don't realize is that Canada actually invests heavily in border security, $1.3 billion in multi-year funding. Yet, the narrative persists that Canada is the problem. In my opinion, this is less about security and more about political posturing. It's easier to blame a neighbor than to address your own systemic issues. Here's a detail I find fascinating. Canada's fentanyl czar, Kevin Brusso, pointed out that in May 2026, less than half a kilogram of fentanyl was seized at the Canada-U.S. border, compared to 358 kilograms at the Mexico-U.S. border. For the year, the numbers are even more striking: 3 kilograms versus 3,221 kilograms. If you take a step back and think about it, the idea that Canada is a major source of fentanyl is almost laughable. Yet, the narrative persists. Why? Because it's politically convenient. Finally, let's talk about the human side of this. Kelly Sundberg, a criminology professor, nails it when he says Canada's real issue isn't drugs coming in, it's staffing and training at the border. We don't have enough officers, and the ones we have need better resources. This raises a deeper question: why aren't we investing more in our own security instead of reacting to political theater? Personally, I think this is where the conversation needs to go. It's not about pointing fingers, it's about solving problems. So, what's the takeaway? The Canada-U.S. border isn't a one-way street of threats. It's a complex, interconnected system where both countries have roles to play and responsibilities to own. The next time you hear someone claim Canada is the problem, remember, the data tells a different story. And in my opinion, that's the story we should be talking about.